The mansion was grand, too grand for a 19-year-old girl who still carried textbooks and notebooks in her bag. The night you stepped inside as Jungkook's bride, you had imagined, even if faintly, that marriage might bring warmth, companionship, or at least acknowledgement. But with him, it was nothing like that. Jungkook was a man carved from ice. He never raised his voice, never showed anger openly, but the chill in his silence was louder than any outburst. At meals, he would sit across the long dining table, his eyes fixed on his phone or the untouched wine glass, never on you, the first week you had tried. Do you want me to serve you? Jungkook didn't even glance up. He simply pushed the plate closer to himself, his voice calm but dismissive. The staff will handle it. That was it. No small talk, no questions about your day. Nothing that resembled the conversations a husband and wife might share. Every evening, when you returned from college, the routine was the same. He would be in the study door, closed, guard station, outside while you ate dinner alone. Sometimes you would hear the faint sound of his deep voice over the phone, speaking in clipped words, giving commands you didn't understand. At first, you had thought he was simply too busy, a workaholic perhaps. But as days turned into weeks, the realization settled in painfully. You were a stranger living in your husband's house. He never offered to drive you to college. He never called to ask if you had eaten or reached home safely. Not once did he look like he cared. Yet there were little things, unsettling things that you couldn't ignore. One afternoon, as you walked out of the campus gate, you noticed a black car parked across the street. It wasn't just there once, it was there every day. The tinted windows hide the passengers, but you had caught glimpses of sharp suited men inside. When you paused trying to peek, the car would slowly roll away, only to reappear the next day. At first, you thought you were imagining things, but when it became routine, you realized you were being watched. And though Jungkook never said it, never admitted to it, you knew deep down those men belonged to him. He would never call you to ask where you were, but somehow he always knew. Still, the distance between you and him grew heavy by the day. Nights felt lonelier, mornings felt mechanical. You were married, yes, but it felt like you were living beside a shadow, not a man. At 19, you should have been worrying about exams, assignments, and the usual college drama. But instead, you carried a weight no one around you could understand marriage. Every time you walked into the classroom, whispers followed you, not because you were late, not because of your grades, but because of the ring glinting faintly on your finger. That single band was enough to make you a target. It wasn't a secret anymore. Everyone knew you were married to a man older than you, a man they assumed was rich and powerful. And college students, cruel in their youth, turned that knowledge into weapons. Sana, with her perfectly styled hair and sharp tongue, was the first to strike. Look who's here, the little bride. Tell me, why do you call him Oppa or Ajushi at home? Her friend Meena snickered loudly, making sure the entire group of students in the hallway could hear. Please, Sana, don't be mean. She doesn't love him. She just loves his bank account. Everyone knows she is nothing but a sugar baby with a marriage certificate. Their laughter sting more than their words, but you clenched your books tighter and walked past them, pretending their voices didn't sink into your skin. You had learned early on that silence was your only shield, but the boys were worse. Hosok made sure of that one afternoon as you walked across the courtyard. He purposely bumped into you, shoving his shoulder into yours hard enough for your books to scatter across the ground. Careful, Mrs. Rich Bride wouldn't want you to break a nail before serving your husband tonight. You bite down on your lip so hard it almost bled, bending to pick up your books while his friends laughed. Jiwoon, the cruelest of them all, noticed the faint purple mark on your wrist when your sleeve slipped back. Instead of keeping quiet, he smirked weakly. Oh, look at this. Did Heavy get rough with you, or is that what you like, huh? The hallway roared with laughter, and you felt the heat of humiliation crawl up your neck. No one knew the truth that those bruises were not from Jungkook but from their constant pushing, shoving, and cornering. You pressed your sleeve back down and kept walking even as your eyes burned. By the time you reached the restroom, tears spilled silently and you pressed your palm against your mouth to keep from sobbing aloud. Every day was like this, a cycle of whispers, laughter, and cruel jokes. A cycle that made your chest heavy with dread every morning when you packed your bag. The irony was bitter. You were married, yet longer than ever. At home, Jungkook barely acknowledged your presence. At college, your peers mocked you relentlessly. There was no safe place left. And still, you never told Jungkook. He wouldn't care, you thought. Why would he? He couldn't even ask you how your day was. But little did you know, he noticed everything. He always did. The house was quiet when you returned that evening, your steps light as though you could tiptoe past the heaviness that always lingered within these walls. You slipped into your room, shutting the door softly behind you. All you wanted was to change out of your stiff college uniform, hide the evidence of another brutal day, and crawl beneath the sheets before anyone noticed. You peeled your cardigan off slowly, wincing when the fabric brushed against the bruise blooming across your upper arm, an ugly mix of violet and blue. You didn't hear him at first. You thought you were alone, but when you glanced toward the mirror, you caught his reflection in the doorway. Jungkook. He stood leaning against the frame, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark, sharp, and blinking, were fixed on the exposed brows. The sight of it carved something into his features, something colder than usual. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking as though he was forcing himself not to speak. You froze, tugging your sleeve back down quickly, your throat suddenly dry. I didn't hear you come in. He didn't answer, he just watched you, the silence stretching unbearably until you felt your knees weaken. Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared down the hallway. The sound of his footsteps fading into the vastness of the house. For the rest of the evening, he said nothing, but you felt it, the weight of his gaze following you at dinner. The cold silence heavier than usual, his wine glass untouched. You thought maybe he hadn't cared enough to ask, maybe he had dismissed it entirely, like everything else about you. You were wrong. Later that night, when the house had grown still, you left your room for a glass of water. As you paraded down the corridor, a hand shot out from the shadows, catching your wrists and pulling you back against the wall. You gasped, looking up, and found Jungkook towering over you. His face was inches from yours, his eyes no longer unreadable but stormy, burning with a fury you hadn't seen before. Who did this to you? His voice was low, dangerous, vibrating through the hallway. I just tripped. It's nothing. You tried to look away, but his grip on your wrist tightened, dragging your arm upward. He pushed your sleeve back with controlled force, revealing the bruise again. His jaw clenched as his thumb brushed the swollen skin. His touch both gentle and searing. Don't lie to me. It's not important. Not important. His tone cut like a blade, quiet but merciless. You expect me to believe you bruise like this from falling? Your lips trembled, words tangled in your throat, shame born harder than the ache in your arm. You wanted to vanish to escape his piercing stare. Please just leave it alone. For a moment, the air grew suffocating between you. His chest rose and fell with restrained anger, his eyes flickering with emotions he refused to name. Finally, he released your wrist abruptly, stepping back, his expression shattered once again. Fine, don't tell me. He turned away, his cold mask snapping back into place, but as he walked off into the shadows, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that behind that icy silence, a storm was brewing. The entire campus was in chaos that morning. Students gathered in corners, whispering about the convoy of black cars lined across the gates. Men in black suits rolled the hallways, their expressions flat and dangerous, making professors step aside with their heads bowed. No one dared to breathe. When your name crackled through the loudspeaker, Wine report to the principal's office immediately. Your palms went clammy. You were not prepared for what you saw when you walked in. Jungkook sat across from the principal, his leg crossed, one hand resting lazily on the armrest of the chair. But there was nothing relaxed about him. His aura filled the room like a storm about the break. Dressed in black, his gaze was sharp and level, his jaw tight, and the glint of his watch caught the light like a blade. Two bodyguards loomed behind him, their presence alone making the air suffocating. The principal, usually pompous and overbearing, looked like a child caught stealing. His forehead glistened with sweat as he adjusted his glasses, his voice trembling slightly when he greeted you. Wine, please sit. You did, nervously clutching your bag. Chungkook's eyes slid to you, cold and unreadable. No comfort, no softness, just a quiet demand for the truth. The door opened again. Sana, Mina, Hosuk, and Jiwon shuffled inside. The arrogance they usually wore like armor had vanished. Their eyes darted nervously to the bodyguards, to Jungkook's unreadable expression. Then to the floor, Jungkook didn't bother looking at them. He spoke only once, and the room froze. Tell me who? Your lips parted, unsure, but his gaze locked on you, dark and merciless. And you knew he wouldn't accept silence. Your hand trembled as you pointed toward Seda, Mina, Hosuk, and Jiwon. The shift in the room was immediate. Jungkook's eyes finally lifted to the blaze, and the temperature seemed to drop. Stan, they obeyed without hesitation, fear flickering in their eyes. Hosuk tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Sir, it was just. Jungkook cut him off with a look so sharp it silenced him mid sentence. Bruises on her skin? You think that is a game? Mina stepped forward, wringing her hands, her voice small. We didn't mean it won't happen again. Jungkook stood slowly. The scrape of his chair against the floor was louder than their breaths. He walked toward them with a calm that was more terrifying than weak. His voice was low, deliberate, laced with venom. You touched my wife, you mocked her, you made her bleed. Sana's knees buckled slowly as she stammered. We are sorry, please forgive us. Jiwon, usually the boldest, looked pale as death. His lips trembled and his eyes flickered to the door as though escape was possible. Sir John, I assure you, these students will face the strictest disciplinary measures, expulsion if necessary. There is no need. Jungkook turned his head slightly, his eyes cutting to the principal. The man fell silent instantly. His words choking in his throat, the authority he wielded in his building meant nothing under Jungkook's stare. You should pray I let you handle it. The principal swallowed hard, nodding rapidly, his hands trembling against the desk. Jungkook's gaze lingered on the bullies one last time. They couldn't even meet his eyes. Hosuk's fists clenched at his sides. Mina and Sana looked close to tears, and Jiwon's bravado had shattered completely. Finally, Jungkook turned on his heel, his coat sweeping behind him as he walked out. Bodyguards following, he didn't shout, didn't raise a hand. He didn't need to. His silence was more terrifying than violence. He remained frozen, her heart hammering, staring at the door he had just exited through. Did he really let them go so easily? But in your gut, these and is twisted. That hadn't been mercy in his eyes, that had been promise. The mansion was quieter than usual that night, a silence so heavy it made your skin prickle. You had searched for Jungkook in his study, the dining hall, even the balcony where he sometimes brooded with a glass of wine, but he was not here. When you asked one of the guards where he was, the man hesitated, his eyes flickering with unease broke. He finally answered. His downstairs Mrs. Road in the chamber. You frowned, chamber. You hadn't even known such a place existed in the house. But your curiosity and unease pushed your feet forward. The guard led you down a narrow hallway behind a heavy iron door you had never noticed before. As it opened with a creak, a rush of cold air met your skin, carrying with it muffled screams. Your heart stopped. The chamber was dimly lit, shadows flickering across concrete walls, and there in the center were Sana, Mina, Hosok, and Jiwon, your police. Their hands were bound behind their backs, their knees scraped and bleeding against the floor, their faces marked with fear and fresh bruises. They whimpered, cried, begged for forgiveness that would never come. At the far end of the room, Jungkook sat on a black leather chair like a king upon his throne. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, veins taut along his forearms. A silver watch gleaming under the harsh light, his posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes were anything but cold, deadly, unforgiving. He didn't look at them at first, he looked at you. Come closer, Wine. Your feet felt heavy, but somehow you obeyed. Stepping into the room, the moment you entered, all four bullies turned their desperate eyes to you, pleading silently, but you couldn't move your gaze from Jungkook. He finally rose from his seat, slow and deliberate. Each step he took echoed against the concrete floor, a predator circling his prey. Do you know what happens to people who touch what's mine? Sana sobbed, shaking her head. Please, we didn't mean to. We are sorry. We will never. Chunguk cold laugh cut through her words, void of amusement. So it doesn't erase the bruises on her skin. So it doesn't erase the humiliation you made her endure. He turned his gaze to Hosuk, whose face was ashen. You shoved her, didn't you? Hosuk stammered, but his words were swallowed by a sharp kick Chunguk delivered to his ribs, sending him sprawled with a cry of pain, the sound echoed, making your heart race. Mina screamed, begging, please stop, we will never touch her again, I swear. Chunguk crouched down in front of her, his face inches from hers, his voice calm but venomous. You thought she was weak, you thought she had no one, you were wrong. He straightened, turning his head slowly toward you. For a moment, the mask of his cold husband you had known shattered, and you saw him for what he truly was. A man who ruled in blood and fear, a mafia king. His voice was steady, merciless as his words cut through the quiet around you. No one lays a hand on my wife and walks away breathing. The bull screamed louder, begging for their lives, but Chungu didn't even flinch. He simply turned his back to them, his cold eyes still locked on you, as if to say, this is the world you married into. In that moment, the truth hit you like a plea. You were not just married to a cold, distant husband, you were married to the most dangerous man you had ever met. The mansion was eerily quiet after that night in the chamber. The screams of your bullies still echoed faintly in your ears. Their terrified pleas spread into your memory. You hadn't asked Chunguk what he did with them afterward. Part of you was too afraid to know. The only thing you were certain of was that they would never bother you again. At college, the whispers stopped. Sana, Mina, Hosok, and June were gone, whether expelled, vanished, or worse, no one knew. Students avoided you now, not out of mockery, but out of fear. Every time you walked down the hallway, eyes lowered, footsteps quickened, you were not a victim anymore. You were the wife of someone untouchable. But at home, the weight of truth passed heavier on your chest. Jungkook was no ordinary man, no distant husband tied to business. He was something far darker, far more dangerous. A mafia king who could silence a room with a glance, who could destroy lives with a single order, and yet that same man had destroyed your police for laying a hand on you. One evening, you found him on the balcony, cigarette smoke curling into the night air. His posture was casual, but his aura radiated the same quiet dominance that had terrified the police. You approached cautiously, your voice barely above a whisper. Why did you do it? He didn't turn, only exhaled a stream of smoke into the dark. Because you are mine. The simplicity of his words sent a shiver down your spine. Not tender, not romantic, but possessive, absolute. You pressed your arms around yourself, torn between fear and a knot. Unshakable warmth, he had never cared to show affection, never softened toward you, yet when it came to your pain, he had become merciless. Slowly he turned to face you, his gaze sharp but softer than you had ever seen it. This world I live in, it's not gentle. You wanted to hide from me, but I see everything wide, and anyone who thinks they can touch what belongs to me. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his voice dropping lower, will not survive it. Your heart pounded in your chest, your mind tangled between fear, shock, and a dangerous comfort. For the first time since your marriage, you truly understood who your husband was. Not just the cold man at the dining table, not just the silent figure disappearing into his study. He was your protector, your jailer, your husband, your mafia king, and whether you liked it or not, you were his.